All right. I feel like this is going to be a really amazing conversation today between two incredible leaders. And so I do want to get going. Before we get started, a couple of logistic announcements. We are going to leave time at the end for questions, comments, etc. We really want to take advantage of these two experts that we have on the phone here today. So in order to ask questions, please feel free to use the Q&A functionality as part of the Zoom, as well as the chat functionality. I'll be monitoring both as we progress through the webinar and make sure that we get it to a bunch of questions, or as many as we possibly can. And any that we don't answer, we'll make sure that we follow up on after the fact. So welcome to today's webinar, Digital Pathology as the New Frontier. My name is Chantal Hopper. It is a great pleasure to be hosting what I think will be a wonderful discussion today. I am the Vice President of Customer Success at Ambra Health. I work very closely with all of our customers to support and deliver our platform. And I'm very honored to be on today with two wonderful gentlemen who I have the pleasure of introducing. And I'll let them give a few words about themselves before we sort of open up the discussion. First, Inder Kohli from HSS. Inder, do you mind giving us a brief introduction to you and sort of your interest in being on today for this discussion?
Sure. Thank you, Chantal. And I am really excited to be here today. My name is Inder Kohli. I work for Hospital for Special Surgery. I am the AVP for Clinical Applications, where I have oversight over technology solutions, their implementation, as well as support across the hospital, across the enterprise, including radiology and pathology department. And one of the reasons I'm participant today here is because we at HSS implemented an integrated diagnostic solution for digital pathology earlier this year. And that has been going very well and was a pioneer implementation in terms of what we achieved.
That's wonderful.
I'm excited to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I also have the pleasure of introducing someone with whom I work very closely on a day-to-day basis, Morris Panner, who is the CEO at Ambra Health. Morris, I'll let you say a few words.
Sure. Thanks, Chantal. You know, Inder, I think we're here for the same reasons, which is that the role of digital pathology and the role of an integrated data package to improve patient outcomes is probably the most exciting thing that is happening in American healthcare right now. And it is really path-breaking work. So to be able to have Inder here is fantastic. There is still no other, imaging provides a unique capability, which is it lets you see inside of a person without a surgical intervention. Pathology is, in most cases, a little bit more invasive, but still very minimally invasive. And the information payload that you get is incredible. And as you start aggregating those and directing them together, you start to realize the promise of diagnostic tools and even preventative tools. So we're very excited to learn today from Inder and their experience.
Amazing. So I'm going to go ahead and kick us off with sort of setting the stage for why we're talking about what we're talking about here. Pathology is obviously the study of disease, right? Causes, effects, nature. I think studying disease is a very broad discipline that involves a lot of different professionals. And we at Ambra Health are very familiar with discussing imaging and data types becoming more digitized. But I think pathology is also starting to experience a transformation, right? Scanners, advanced software, et cetera, is starting to make pathology, the digital pathology rather, more of a reality by creating high resolution digital images that up the slides to be able to examine and further study the imaging or the pathology images as well. So that is starting to exist today. However, the ability to actually transfer and move around these images, right, that the pathologists are seeing under the microscope is something I think we're talking about and just starting to get into, as the ability to do so is going to have significant benefits for both pathology and the wider medical field and clinical care. We at Ambra Health are just starting to explore actually participating in what is the exchange of pathology images, right? Converting pathology imaging to DICOM format using OpenSlide, the ability to transfer to third-party DICOM applications, and then also ability to provide downstream access to a PACS, apologies, or a pathology viewer. And I think that the 5 big trends I'm hoping to dive into today with our 2 panelists are as follows. So 5 ways that digital pathology is driving innovation. First, instant image sharing and better collaboration. We talk all the time about how prior imaging is so beneficial to patient care, and pathology is not dissimilar in that regard. So physicians being able to access patients' pathology data is becoming essential. Number 2, enabling the use of AI for deeper insights. So being able to bring pathology data online gives us the opportunity to further analyze slides and utilize digital tools, which ultimately leads to trend number 3, right? Unlocking potential medical breakthroughs. So the ability to have a larger sample size of this information in a digital form will allow us to do even more incredible research, innovative research that is going to give us a lot greater understanding of cause and effects of disease. Next, I think the digitization of any file type, of any data. I know for us it's imaging, but it just introduces the opportunity to better manage health data overall, to have it more organized, et cetera, which we all know is incredibly important in the clinical journey. And then finally, and I think this one is always really intriguing, is the reduction in physical strain for pathologists. I think we're all very used to seeing images of physicians sort of hunched over their microscopes examining this type of data. And so the idea of digitizing this type of file and allowing the clinician to view it on a high-res screen, I think is another huge opportunity. So just a brief introduction on setting the stage here for what I think we're going to be talking about. I've got a couple of questions that we've actually gathered ahead of time from the folks who are online today. But before we dive into those specifically, I thought I would just sort of open it up to Morris and to Inder to maybe lead with some initial comments on some of the trends that we just discussed. Why don't we actually start with the first trend here, instant image sharing and better collaboration. Inder, I would love to hear from you first on this point.
Sure, and I think, and you rightfully made that as a number 1 item. And you know, prior to, or even for most institutions today, if a clinician wants to look at a pathology image, they really have to make an appointment with the pathology, sit across the table with a multi-headed microscope and review those images. And with the way everyone is busy, we know that may not happen as often and may not occur when it's needed. That's really the advantage of availability of digital pathology images, right? The more imaging, the more data you have at the fingertip of clinician, the better it is for the patient, the better it is for making the diagnosis. And of course, there are other benefits which are more with research, education, and data mining. But I think the first and foremost benefit will be to the patient. So absolutely, this was, I think, one of the most significant benefits we achieved by making a patient's pathology data available to all clinicians.
That's super interesting. I would love to dig in a little bit on how you're talking about this process as if it's happening in real time today. What have you guys done over to start to kind of venture into this world where this data type is more readily accessible?
So it is, I would not say it's not real time, but it's pretty close. One of the difference with pathology versus radiology is radiology, as soon as the tech ends the exam, the image is available in PACS and on the radiologist's queue for interpretation. On the pathology side, we still have the process of cutting the slide, making a glass slide, and scanning. So that's definitely a manual process. And then there's a QA process. So it's not real time, but
right.
It is available within a short time, could be as little as few hours to a day for pathologists to interpret and in the same format available to all clinicians. How we achieved it is by really, 2 ways. One is, of course, the whole integrated workflow where the image is available to pathologists. At the same time, pathologists have access to patient radiology images to correlate. And once the diagnosis is made, the image is available in our system for all clinicians. And the advantage we have there is that they didn't need to learn anything new. They use the same portal they always used, and they now have availability for other images other than radiology.
And maybe I could add on a little bit. one of the things that happened, and Inder and I chatted about this, one of the things that happened in radiology, this is so distant past that it's hard to imagine. The DICOM standard, and as someone once said to me, why does a healthcare standard start with DI? But it does. DICOM standard was a pretty impactful idea. It lets you take outputs from these sophisticated devices, and there's kind of a common language. It's not seamless, but there's a common format.
Mm-hmm.
What's exciting about what's happening in pathology is the extent to which we are beginning to see that kind of common language. And I think in general, it has been a little more challenging because formats have been a little bit different, even off of some of the digital output devices.
Mm-hmm.
But what I think is exciting is we get to this notion that you can see stuff in a common way, everything changes at that point. And one of the things I was impressed by when Inder and I were chatting was Inder's appreciation of how important it is to have that kind of common language. And Inder, I don't know how you see that industry trend developing. As I say, imaging, it feels like to even talk about it feels ridiculous, but it was a big advance. And I think pathology is just now starting to catch up. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that too.
Yes, I mean, you're correct about it. And DICOM has been a de facto standard for radiology, and every vendor has adapted to it, right? The vendors generating those images and the vendors processing those images, which is not quite the case with pathology yet, though it's gaining traction. But the microscope scanners do have different formats they deliver the imaging in. Where the standardization helps is that eventually then it pans out in terms of the quality of data, the attributes of the data, which could eventually be part of a large data set across institution, for that matter, across the world, and you are essentially evaluating on the same parameters. We are not quite there yet with pathology, but I'm pretty hopeful that since everything is accelerated these days, like the digital transformation, which used to take 3 years, now takes like 6 months. There is, it's not just enough to have digital images. The ability to process that data, to correlate that data at a data level is also equally important. So I'm pretty hopeful that, soon we can get to a standard where the imaging standards across those scanner vendors or microscope scanners conform to one standard, and then no matter what happens, the tool set which is available for pathologists to interpret, which is also very important, right? That's where they can really interact with these images at a level not available in 2D images, is not compromised, and they are able to perform the diagnosis, and then at the same time we have a data which is mineable, which is relatable, which can coexist with other large data sets. So, long way of saying, I agree that we need to get to a standard format, that it's gaining traction, but it's just not there yet.
And so one of the things I wanted to ask you, Inder, because you used a word at the end that I love, which is mineable. And one of the things that I think you're highlighting in your description is the difference between point-in-time diagnostics versus a really rich asset that is mineable. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about that, if you would, because I think I know what you're saying in mineable, but I'd love to hear how you're thinking about the mother lode of information here that you can mine. I'd love to hear that.
So, and this has gained traction in radiology side, where, a use of AI on large data sets to identify, to diagnose, to find correlations, to find misdiagnosis. Digital pathology lends itself to that kind of standardization because, there is a manual task for cell counting or grading of cancer cells. All of those tasks could be standardized, could be, so before they're standardized, could be automated, could be, with the advent of machine learning, AI tools, and as a result of that, get standardized. So there's a greater potential. We in the world are not collecting enough digital pathology data as yet to have an impact. But as I said, everything is on an accelerated speed these days. It's a matter of months to years where there's a large accumulation of pathology data. And if we are able to run those algorithms on it, on those tools on it, that gives us the insight into the data, the correlation, maybe diagnosis, maybe solving complex medical conditions. That's where I was going with.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the idea. Maybe you can talk a little bit about this, but as we start thinking about algorithmic development and deployment, I'd love to kind of move. Do you think the workflow in pathology is such that it will have a different role for AI, or how do you see that going forward? Do you have reflections on that? Because I do think one of the components that we've observed has been the value of AI is often very dependent on where in the workflow it can be used, and are you able to enhance outcomes? And it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be core imaging data. Sometimes AI can be very powerful in other aspects of the process, but I'd love to hear your reflections.
So I will say in this case, we are a unique hospital, and essentially we do musculoskeletal disease and orthopedics. So there is probably not enough use case or data for AI in our field, but doesn't mean that it cannot be developed. But it definitely is there for the cancer diagnosis. So, and I'm just basing it on my experience of how we utilize digital pathology here. There's certain aspects of a tool which are part of a tool set, right? Which allow you to have a standard diagnosis across the institution. That definitely helped in getting data standardization, the underlying data standardization. To your point, the AI can have impact on multiple levels, not just at imaging, and that has always been the star attraction, right? At a point of care, a system is smart enough to alert you, to prompt you, to in many ways, make you act in a certain way for the interest of the patient. So that is not purely on imaging, but from a pathologist diagnosis perspective, the more tools we can offer, which allow either one with ease of diagnosis as well as standardization, and anything which can automate a manual process will be helpful.
Great. So, Chantal, I don't know. I mean, I'm getting a little carried away here with my conversation with Inder, and I may be disrupting all this, but I wanted to give the floor back to you because
are you kidding?
I'm a little carried away.
Are you kidding? I'm sort of just sitting here observing and absorbing, I should say, and listening. This is all great stuff. I mean, we definitely have some questions we can get into, but Morris, I think, I think the questions you're asking are the ones everybody is probably equally curious about. So if you have something that you're thinking about in response to Inder, I would love for you to surface that. If not, we can sort of go to some of the other kind of pre-planned questions.
But why don't we keep moving? Because the nice thing about this, one of the interesting things, and Inder and I talked about this too, it is not as common as you would think for a SIIM webinar where we get a lot of questions in advance. We often get questions before. Yeah. But here, unusually, Inder and I had to have a call yesterday because we'd already gotten so many questions. I wanted to make sure that we were ready. So that is a sign of, I think, how hot this area is right now. So why don't we keep going to them, because people took a lot of effort to send them in. So I want to do that too.
I support that. And we also already have a bunch of questions coming in real time. So we'll get to it. I'll start with the first question. Digital pathology is a great way to create a patient diagnostic map. We've just sort of talked about this. What challenges from your perspective do we have with respect to data security when we transverse between different diagnostic modalities?
So I think the main challenge is the different file formats. Every scanner vendor has a different file format, and a lot of them do not support DICOM. Our applications, our systems are really designed to handle DICOM, right? We've been using that for many years. We have assessed the security consideration, gone through the testing, the penetration testing, and that stays as a challenge in terms of data security. Doesn't mean that it can't be addressed, but in many ways we have to kind of start again versus utilizing the established protocols, the established ways of sharing images within the organization. Vendors could be sharing images within, because every image acquired is shared within the enterprise storage, within the enterprise architecture. So it could be an easy way of sharing, just unsecure, or we have taken all the considerations in terms of securing the data transfer. So the more file formats we have, the more the denominator increases, and we do address all of those challenges versus a standard like DICOM.
Morris, did you have any thoughts on the security piece?
I'm happy I don't have Inder's job, because I think the level of complexity, it's always easy to say no on security, because the safest thing to do, obviously, is if you want a perfectly safe environment, you make it as you don't have any interoperability, because the problem of the easiest way to do it is shut down these kinds of ideas. And I think what we are seeing is the rise of the agile security professional who is thinking about thinking about how do you be an enabling part of the care team while still protecting patient data. And as I say, it is a hard job, but it is a heroic one right now. So my hat's off to the people who are doing it, because it's very important.
Yeah, Inder, anything else on that, or should we move on to the next question?
Yeah, we can move on. I think
all right.
The challenges.
Awesome. Next question. The framing is, what is a primary hurdle, but I think we can kind of expand it and talk about multiple hurdles when it comes for digital pathology, when it comes to sharing between hospital systems. I think we've talked a little bit about standardization and the challenges there just within the space, but let's a big part of the value add we've just uncovered is the ability to share the imaging. But what are some additional explicit challenges on sharing between systems?
Right. So I won't cover the challenges we already discussed, but really we can call it a hurdle, but that's also really the challenge I take in, or my team takes in, every time we implement any new technology, right? The goal is for the technology to fit in the existing tool set, existing workflow for the clinician. And that is one hurdle, right? Nobody in this day and age wants one more standalone system where they log in to review images or any kind of data, and then use another system to make their diagnosis, and use the third system to access those images. So the hurdle for us was, how can we keep a pathologist workflow intact? I already mentioned, digital pathology already has a requirement that the manual work doesn't go away, right? Film development went away with radiology, but here we still have to, cut the slide and scan the slide. So there was an added work at the front end of the process. So the goal was to compensate at the back end, right? Either by creating more efficiency or offering so many benefits that nobody should complain about the extra work. And that's what we were able to achieve, right? We were able to create this unique integration with all our vendors combined. So it was really a significant development project to create a workflow where pathologists have everything like they had before, except the microscope. So they will go through their work list. They are able to launch the images from there. They're able to make diagnosis using their existing workflow, using Dragon. And also at that point, they have an added benefit of, within the patient context, ability to look at radiology images to correlate. So pathologists have an advantage here. Now, that advantage stays within a small lab, right? A group of people. How do you translate that advantage to the rest of the organization? And that's where the second advantage, the hurdle we had, and we were able to overcome by utilizing a familiar platform. All clinicians have access to radiology images. Now all clinicians have access to radiology and pathology images within the same portal, utilizing the same set of tools. So the hurdle of launching a new portal, training, service, all of that was removed. So from our perspective, this was one big hurdle. The second hurdle is probably the same for all organizations. It is a little bit hardware centric, right? The pathology images are large, anywhere between half of gig to 2 gig, depending on the magnification. And the server side rendering is required. So, as I mentioned earlier, these images are reviewed in a very interactive manner. And if there's not an optimal resolution or rendering available to pathologists, the experience will be suboptimal. Thankfully, we were able to achieve that not only within our institution, but those pathologists are also able to work from home using the standard residential broadband system and have not complained to us about any of such issues. So really the hardware and really the juice you provide to the servers to create an optimal experience. I think those are the two major hurdles for any institution.
I think that's totally right. We have one question specifically that just says pathology image size challenges, exclamation point, question mark, exclamation point. So that's, I think, definitely top of mind for everyone.
And it is on top of mind, but I can tell you that a vast majority of our images are under half a gig size. So, occasionally you need that 40x magnification and large sizes. So maybe it is made out to be much larger, or maybe the kind of cases we see at HSS that the slide size has not been an issue.
Morris, did you have any follow-on thoughts here in terms of the hurdles for that intra-system sharing to follow on to Inder?
Yeah, I think one of the complexities is, how do we, as we think about the transition to DICOM, there are different options. I'm looking at some of the questions and we can dig back to them, but just as a sort of notion of, sometimes we wrap files. We do some core conversion of digital files. I think right now we're in the middle of a little bit of a transition over towards digital path. And I guess what I would say is a little bit of I may not have this right, so Inder, you should correct me, but the way I kind of visualize it in my own kind of flow chart for my own brain, I think of the base, which is truly staining slides. And that is an art, and it is very pixel rich, but you have to convert it to pixels. It is fundamentally something that is a physical medium being converted to a digital medium. Right. Those are, I think, the largest images, because you're trying to capture a lot of depth in that was not really meant to be digitally captured. Then you go a level up to sort of what I consider to be true digital path. That is actually there's a lot of work that has been done to make digital path conform to at least some, it's much more malleable. And we have some questions, and we should talk about open slide format versus vendor proprietary format. But the actual digital path, those are not typically massive images. And then the third layer of all this is, what do we do about that lack of kind of integrated standard? So that's really, that's sort of another frontier. And we have some approaches, whether you're wrapping or you're trying to convert into a DICOM standard. Those are all complexities. And I think when people talk about really, really big files, they're talking about the legacy. I call it legacy. It's still very much the present day, but the conversion of what used to be the way to transfer pathology data, which was to put slides in a wooden box and either carry it or ship it to somebody else. And you could imagine that was not done that often relative to the total amount of slides created. And so big innovation, but we sort of see it in that way. And Inder, I don't know, is that kind of the topology that you see, or do you see it differently?
So on the staining side, yes, I think generally there is a concern around the color standardization across various scanner vendors, right? I think that is, again, one of the pieces which needs to be standardized across. But in terms of what we are seeing is, for vast majority of slides, you scan them and the file size has not been an issue, right? There are certain slides which cannot even be digitized, and I'm not a pathologist to really comment on it. I wish someone was a pathologist on this panel, but I know there are certain slides, because of the stain requirements, are not even digitized because they still end up using microscope. And to your earlier point about, or later point about really the sharing of images, you're correct. I mean, that is still in place because very few places are digital. So we do receive those wooden boxes and slides via courier for second opinions and consults and sometimes for research. And that is where the challenge is. You mentioned earlier converting them to DICOM. We are actually grappling with that right now. We are in the process of setting something up where we can accept images from other institutions. And conversion is only good if it maintains your tool set and your ability to interact with that image. And we're trying to figure out what do we lose by converting. I know for sure the easy solution is to accept the native format because then you get all the bells and whistles. But as I already talked about, eventually we all have to conform to one standard image sharing protocol. And so this problem needs to be resolved by all parties involved, really. The source of the image and whoever deals with the image in terms of transfer or ingestion.
And I would thank you for that. And the one thing I would underscore, and this is very much in keeping with the SIIM philosophy, I'm going to put a little bit of a plug in for SIIM here, which I think is an important organization. I was on a planning meeting that started yesterday and will continue tomorrow for the annual meeting and for the educational tracks. And I think one of the exciting pieces of it is there were pathologists involved in the planning. And one thing I would put out there is I would love it if you are listening and you're a pathologist or you're that's core to what you're doing, reach out to Inder and myself, because one of the things we are constantly trying to do at SIIM is marry up the clinical, technical, and really display that partnership that I think is necessary for the new age of healthcare, which is so dependent on that team approach. So I would underscore what Inder said and welcome that. And I know that SIIM is very excited to try to broaden out its reach into that community. And I'm a very big proponent of SIIM and would be happy to get those inquiries and connect you with Anna and make sure that we bring that educational footprint to bear.
That's awesome. We still have a ton of questions rolling in. In all my time, or in the number of times I've hosted one of these webinars, I can't say I've seen this level of volume. Inder, I think people are so interested in tapping into your expertise in this space. I'm going to continue with some of the bigger picture. There are definitely some more tactical questions. There's a question around, how do you think about evaluating and or assessing the current scanners in the market from both a standard and an integration perspective? So
for a US market, I think that the key is which one is FDA approved for primary diagnosis. So that has been the reality here. Compared to other parts of the world, US has been a little behind in terms of approving scanner and software vendors for primary diagnosis. So that kind of gives you a small list to work with. And in this case, the entire solution is authorized by FDA, which is the software solution, the scanner vendor, and the viewing station. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely one, right? I will be a little biased in saying, right, and which is actually a great philosophy. If you have an existing vendor and you can utilize them, which is what HSS did, it just helps you in very many ways, right? Mm-hmm. For us, the basic infrastructure is already there. We just have to incrementally expand it to add digital pathology to it. The familiarity with this tool, with the viewer, is always there, right? And you can expand it. But I also know vast majority of organizations are not in this space, right? So then what do? Then you probably now, that's where the market will go to, right? Where you you don't, from a clinician perspective, you don't worry where the image is coming from, but as long as you have one viewer, so the VNAs and one common viewer where you're aggregating all imaging for clinician. So those are some of the ways to think. Underlying pathology system, you pick the best which work for your organization. I would say, as I said, one of the primary hurdles for us was integrated workflow. That should be the consideration for everyone. No one wants to log into a separate system for any of activities. And then, right, if you are like most other institutions where you don't have that ability to consolidate all within one vendor, you don't have ability to change your PACS vendor or pathology vendor, you look at the option of where the companies like Ambra or other come in the space where they offer you that one aggregated viewer with all the tool set. The tool set is important too.
For sure. Morris, any thoughts there?
No, I think it is helpful to hear Inder's perspective and to start plotting. I almost now for the next one of these want to start seeing some basic workflow diagrams as we think about the various ways these systems interact, because it is it's an evolving field and it's kind of exciting.
Awesome. I'll keep moving through to our next question. What were some best practices you employed or you've seen in order to increase pathologists to leave the physical microscope and shift more towards the PC pathology PACS with AI and new digital tools available? I think, we talk a lot about system adoption. You just addressed it as well. Sort of what tactics have you employed?
So I'll start by bragging about something. When we deployed, we had a goal that we, within 9 months, we'll get to like 70% or 65 to 70% digital imaging or digital diagnosis. Within less than 6 months, we are at 75%. So we obviously adopted it well. And I will, I take credit for it partially because we had, really great champions in the pathology department who worked with us, who were right there lockstep throughout our evaluation, our pilots, our deployment, right? So that was there. We went through, I think 4 times more than the recommended, what you call as parallel validation. While really, you do the same diagnosis on microscope and then on computer. I think the recommended number was 60, and then we did like maybe 230 or something over the period of time. So that gave enough confidence to our pathology department that they can switch over to digital diagnosis. Secondly, additionally, there were some other catalysts. We also established the full workstation at every pathologist's home. And there was a major snowstorm, and the workload did not suffer because several of them worked from home and carried on their work. So certain those external events also helped.
Right.
Our long validation, and lastly, I would say is that we also established a very robust QA process in the middle. So once the image is scanned, the pathology systems review the images and mark them ready for assessment for QA. So there is an intermediate layer where images are assessed for quality, for depth, for everything, and then only presented to pathologists. So they don't have to deal with images they don't need to see or are suboptimal.
Got it.
Yeah.
Morris, any thoughts here?
No, I think that is that those are the trade-offs and the complexity. I think in a lot of the questions that are coming in are zeroing in this area.
Yeah, I think the next question I'd love to get into, because I think it kind of relates to what we were just talking about. Once pathology images are saved digitally and available throughout the enterprise, which non-path specialties are you seeing are starting to take advantage of this new information? We talk about that a lot in radiology, of how the use of imaging is expanding beyond just the radiologist and why that's so important and critical. I'd be curious to hear your perspective on the pathology side of things.
So you want to know which non-path specialties are really good.
Yeah.
So we actually engaged them earlier on. So the specialties are of course radiologists, surgeons, and infectious disease doctors. we engaged them earlier on during our pilot, even before we were live with our primary diagnosis. Interesting images were shared with this core group. So that is how we generated some interest, so it's a three group of people who are primarily using it: the surgeons, the radiologists, and the infectious disease doctor.
Very cool. Morris, I'm just going to keep asking my questions because I just have so many to get through, and definitely chime in as you want.
I think that's perfect. Let's just keep going forward. One thing I think we should do, because there are so many questions, some of these I think we're going to have to do after.
For sure.
And so if you've asked, and people are also giving a lot of really interesting technical details, and I feel like it's hard to capture all of it for the group, but we'll follow up after. And I know, Inder, we have to think about how to make ourselves available to a little more interactive follow-up conversation, because this is quite a lot of questions, and it's fantastic. So I want to make everyone know we're going to get back to them.
For sure. All right, to keep it moving, this is a little bit more of an approach policy question, but are you able to dispose of physical pathology artifacts sooner because they're digitized, or are you keeping both? Talk us through your thoughts on the ROI and the total cost of ownership.
That is an obvious benefit, right? We are in Manhattan, so we don't really store everything here. We store it offsite storage, but that's also expensive. But I don't think the regulation is quite clear yet, right?
Okay.
I think the regulation was about 10 years. You have to save the data, but we, like many other institutions, never throw anything away. So far, I mean, it's too soon for us to even start discarding. And so I think the government has to come up with a regulation around it. So answer is we are saving both.
You are saving both. I love this next question. It's a little bit of a different angle. This person said, I think that the standardization of body part mapping will be essential so that the retrieval of prior imaging, and I'm assuming other data types, within these enterprise imaging platforms, particularly for clinical viewing purposes. How is the industry moving forward with nomenclature standardization? I think this could both apply to radiology and pathology.
I'm stumped by the question because maybe Morris hasn't taken as many questions like me. Maybe he can answer.
Yeah, Morris, we'll turn it to you. Any thoughts on the concept of, I think, standardization from a nomenclature body part?
Yep. So I actually think this is one of the things that is going to change a lot. And I know Dr. Tobin and his team at Cincinnati Children's has been passionate about this topic. Others as well. I'm not giving the whole working group out, but the notion, it's a nice group. And one of the things that we were talking about the other day is without some standardization around this, it slows things down as well. It's a little bit different than standards in digital format. It's a little bit more almost like a meta anatomy where you need to be able to talk about something. Everybody knows what it is, but they call it different things. And when you start doing that with computers, it doesn't work well because computers really depend on things being the same. And so the broader discussion of how to identify and name body parts sounds silly, like everyone took anatomy, we got that, but it is the way you do it in a truly disciplined way for AI consumption. And I think it's a fascinating topic. Again, I think SIIM is doing some nice work on that, and it is a topic of real debate. So I don't think we have an answer other than to kind of acknowledge it has a new valence in an AI algorithmic development world.
Awesome. Next question, and I'm keeping an eye on the time as well because I want to leave some time at the end for some closing thoughts from both of you as well. And I'm kicking myself because I likely should have asked this on the tail of Inder when you were speaking about sort of your efforts in driving adoption of digital pathology. It is 2021. We've all been talking about COVID-19 for almost 2 years now. One of the questions from an audience member is digital pathology being used heavily? I'll reframe it slightly of how did you see the adoption and or the usage of digital pathology change through the COVID-19 pandemic?
So I think this really acted as a catalyst, or COVID-19 acted as a catalyst for some of the FDA approvals during this time.
Interesting.
Yeah, and absolutely. So, prior to this, the pathologists have to be on site in lab, right, to make the diagnosis. Now they can make it from anywhere remote safely, and if they have to quarantine for any reason, which happened for several institutions, they can easily diagnose from home. The other factor I would want to add is that this was published in JAMA about 2 years ago, that overall pathologists that are decreasing population in the United States, about 10% decrease, and an increased workload of 40%. So a digital solution helps you cover for areas which you can otherwise not cover, right? Remote locations, multi-hospital systems can have pathology station in one place or remotely, however it is, and they're able to provide diagnosis, which otherwise is difficult. So I think COVID-19 plays a role because everything has moved digital a lot. Telehealth became a norm. The hospital at home is the new term now being used all around.
Right.
So the answer is yes. And in some cases, the FDA approvals were fast-tracked for this.
Morris, I'll turn it over to you because I know that you likely have some thoughts on COVID-19, the pandemic, and the sort of tailwinds it created for the digitization of data in general.
So we at I don't usually talk about our company, but I think it's worth just mentioning from what happened. We truly, at the beginning of the pandemic, did not know, what would be in store for people's businesses. And I think in general, healthcare systems experienced the same whipsaw effect. But then what we saw was people moved from a infrastructure view that required a physical presence. Physical presence was equated with security and controllability, to a moment where that was no longer true and everything had to be virtualized. And so right now, I think we are in the beginning stages of a mad rush to ensure that we can digitize as much as possible so we have access to it. And I think the searing experience of turning away people from healthcare will never go away for anybody who thinks about it, but for the people who are closest to it, I think it was probably some of the hardest moments of their lives. And so this is a rush to, I think people see it as a life or death matter as they contemplate how we build resilience into this new world.
Awesome. Like Morris said, we have so many incredible questions that we're definitely going to be answering post this webinar. Just being mindful of the time, I thought it would be a good moment to maybe open it up just for some final remarks from each of you. Commentary on the discussion we just had today, digital pathology, where it goes from here, things you're excited about, and all sorts. So I'll turn it over to you. Morris, why don't you start here?
I'm going to be brief. What I was so grateful when Inder came on, because this is pioneering territory. There are some who are farther ahead, and there are always people out in the plains. But I think we are right now as a group pioneering something very, very special. And I'm very grateful to Inder and to HHS for sharing their insights and being open to share more. And what I love about this is we need to share ideas and images. So we'll go on that path. And I want to thank everybody. These are great questions. We have a couple of days of work ahead of us. It's going to be fantastic. And so I think that really does it. Today has been a big day also for our company and news around some corporate developments. I'll let people know that if they are Googling that and they're seeing it, their Google feed is correct. And we're very excited about moving forward, but there's going to be other times to talk more in depth on that. But I'll just confirm that if you're seeing it, your eyes are not deceiving you. And we're excited about all that it will bring to help us do more and more around all of these topics, because we are just getting started in terms of transforming all of these infrastructures with partners across industry and across healthcare.
Wonderful. Inder, I'll turn it over to you to close us out.
Well, I welcome the opportunity to participate in this discussion. And since we've gone live, I've had opportunity to participate in several such discussions, and it is exciting. It is exciting for me personally, years of hard work of envisioning and implementing something, and to see the benefits. And then, more specifically now, where do we go from here? I think we touched on all of those things, but if there are 2 or 3 key themes, one is really, a standardization around both imaging data, the imaging formats, as well as the metadata embedded in an image. That's the beauty of a DICOM. DICOM header has everything, right? The patient information is not separated.
Right.
Not so far the case with this. So, as the vendors, continue to collaborate and evolve, and they can come up with a standard format, that's only going to be beneficial in the long run for the issues I mentioned, or the ideas I mentioned earlier, right? To apply some machine learning, to apply algorithms, to correlate data, to really find, some discoveries from the data, because that's the key, and which is not humanly possible. We have now the fastest computing, the most advanced computing available. We just need the data set to be able to feed into those computing algorithms. So that's where we are going. And then, personally, I feel the more and more institutions have become digital, it's only going to create a more collaborative environment. Again, I base everything with patient in the middle. So the more collaboration, the more consults, the more research which can occur, instead of FedEx delivering those wooden boxes versus a click of a mouse and an image is sent over, the better it will be for the patients now, better it will be for the generations to come. So, that is my hope, that we get there very quickly. And again, thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, what a fantastic and inspiring way to close out this webinar. I thank you both for joining on what has been a crazy day, I'm sure, for both of you. For everybody listening, we will be following up with the answers to questions you submitted. I think the level of engagement we had today just shows the level of interest in this topic. We'll also be following up with a slide deck in the recording. But other than that, thank you to everybody for joining today. Thank you for being a wonderful audience. And we will be in touch very soon. Thank you, Inder, and thank you, Morris.
Thank
you,
Chantal. Thank you, Inder. Thank you, Sam.